Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey. And how many of you are living by the seat of your pants, just making gut, spontaneous decisions? And maybe it's working for you, and maybe it's not. And then how many of you are, you know, debriefing, executing, thinking, planning, and really thinking about the philosophy and the principles behind your actions? We're going to be getting into that conversation today, along with military service, reservist side, as well as deployed here with Mr. Francisco Garza. Great to have you here. And could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great to be here, man. So my name is Francisco Garza. I'm a native of Texas and went to Texas A&M. Figured I would join the service because my roommate was joining the Marines. I followed him right in. So ended up in the Marine Corps. First job was as an infantry officer. Did that for 4 years on the active component side. Then I did 4 years with the recon community. So for those of you who don't know, Marine Recon, they call us super grunts or like super infantry. We are an infantry type unit, but we specialize in parachute insert, scuba dive, Draeger rebreather insert. So like a lot of amphibious stuff, hydrographical surveys, deep reconnaissance, stuff like that. While I was on active duty, I did 2 deployments to Japan and the Far East, and then with recon, I did 1 deployment with the MEU, which is a Navy deployment. So putzed around Southeast Asia, went into the Gulf of Aden, attempted to do some anti-piracy, never saw a single pirate, and then ended up in Djibouti and Kuwait, and then back on ship for the long ride home. After that, uh, the way that I tell the story is I woke up on my buddy's couch. I was 30 years old. I had 2 surfboards and a frying pan to my name. So I was like, you know what? I need something else in my life other than the Marine Corps. So transitioned out, stayed in the reserves because personally, at that time, I thought like, hey, like I still want to be a company commander, and I can do that in the reserves. So I'm gonna stay around for a little bit, hit that wicket, and then I'll see where my life's at. So got out, went to University of Houston, was getting my MBA. COVID happened, graduated during that. I went back on active duty actually for a year in that time period, and then we're at the topic of this conversation, right? Like philosophy, resilience, like not flying by the seat of my pants. Like it came to a head at the end of that. So this is post COVID, post NBA, post active duty year out of the reserves. I get the phone call. Actually, I got 2 phone calls in quick succession. Oh, also, I had my first child during this time period. So my son was born. So a lot of change. Coming back off active duty, I was looking for a new job, and I get 2 successive phone calls. So the first one was from my reserve unit, and they asked me if I wanted to be a company commander. So the answer to that was obviously yes. Like this was the last thing that I wanted to
Right.
do. Like I will do this. And then the second phone call was from a buddy of mine that I met at the University of Houston. Well, we were both in the same cohort, but why we bonded is that we were both Marines. So he gave me the phone call. I was like, hey man, like there's this job. It's in consulting. They're hiring managers, and I think you'd be a good fit. So I was like, awesome. Thanks for the tip. Let's do this. So in the span of really a few months, like let's say a year. So in the span of a year, I went from being a full-time student that was kind of putzing around. Like I had an entry-level job at NASA as a contractor. So like I was just like living the life. Um, but then I had a kid. I was coming off active duty orders, so I needed to find a real job quick. And I had just taken on the responsibility of being a company commander. So like with all of this going down, like I was just flying off the seat of my pants, like going with my gut, like this is what I want, this is what I need. Like I need more income, I need higher civilian job titles, job pay. I'm going to be a company commander, I'm going to be a dad, and like it all kind of came to a head. And as I'm sitting there, like with all these changes happening, I came to the conclusion that I should probably write down what it is that I believe, because the needs in my life were pulling me in mutually exclusive directions, right? Like if you're going to be a good husband and a good father, like something's got to give. If you're going to be a good Marine, especially in the reserve sense, something's got to give. If you're going to be a good corporate, like a leader in the corporate world, something's got to give. So I decided that I was going to write down, like, hey, what is it that I believe, and why do I believe that? And the first draft was absolutely terrifying, but I would highly recommend it. Right, like, try and write down what you believe, and not like super granular or specific, but like write down like what it is that I believe. What is at the core of my belief system, and like how does this relate to like my philosophical approach to life's decisions? And granted, like flying by the seat of my pants got me to the point where I was, but once I got there, as the saying goes, right, like it's one thing to win a, or it's one thing to win a war, to win an election. It's another thing to govern. And that's where I found myself at, where it's like, hey, like here I am, like I did the thing that I set out to do. Now what? And the attributes and skills and gut reaction and like aggressive, like I'm going to accomplish the task mindset that got me there. Once I got there, that was not how I was going to be successful. So that's where the whole genesis of me writing down what is my philosophy came from.
Right. I gotta say, I have to make a t-shirt. Join the Recon and fight pirates, learning how to scrub a toilet. Because
Yeah.
when I was in the Navy, it was a lot of, you think you're gonna do this, that, and that. It is just like clean, clean, clean. You're wiping down surfaces, you're sweeping, you're mopping. You learn how to become, what do they call it, like warrior of the janitorial closet. But I will say so. Let's go back to the very beginning when, your roommate says he's going into the Marines. Now, so you didn't necessarily go officer intentionally. It just happened that way because you were already in college. Or, like if you hadn't been in college, would you have just enlisted or would you have gone officer route through college?
So this one is a direct. So my dad's from Mexico, right? Like neither of my parents are American by birth. They're both Americans now, but my dad's from Mexico. And I told him like when I was in high school and was like, hey, I'm just gonna enlist. And I was looking at the Marines or the Army. Like I was always inclined towards those two services.
Yeah.
And my dad was just horrified because the where he comes from, like that's not necessarily a good thing to do for your life. So he's like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. He's like my older brother had went to Texas A&M, so my dad like had seen the campus. He liked it. He liked the culture. So he literally dragged me to Texas A&M and showed me the Corps of Cadets and the ROTC programs out there, which I ended up not getting an ROTC scholarship. I had to go PLC. I wasn't smart enough for that ROTC money. But he took me up there and was like, "Look, like you can do whatever you want, but I like you will at least apply here, and you will see how this treats you."
Okay.
So my dad is the one that put an absolute kibosh on that dream right off the bat. He didn't tell me no, right, which I think was very like emotionally smart on his part. But he showed me like A&M and was like, "Apply, like you will apply here. If you get accepted, I want you to at least try it." And then that's where I met, you know, honestly, like that's where I met my best friends or most of my best friends, right? Like they were all there and fantastic group of like super capable individuals. And my roommate being one of them, he was dead set, like, hey, I'm going to be a Marine. And I was like, hey, like, you're a cool dude. So like, let's do it. So that's kind of the nexus of that journey.
Yeah, did you two go in on the buddy system or was kind of just like a unofficial buddy system? Hope we meet up at the same command.
Unofficial buddy system. So his name is, I'm not going to drop names. I didn't ask him before this, but so essentially him and I signed up together for the purpose of going to officer candidate school together. And I actually attribute my entire career to him because like I'm driving to a party in 2008 and my phone rings. So I pick it up, a full disclaimer, don't talk on your cell phone and drive. I was young, but like pick up the phone. And I was like, hey man, what's up? And he's like, are you nervous? And I was like, that's a tomorrow problem. And he's like, but the plane leaves tomorrow. And I'm like, what? And like I like pull over, I like start digging through my stuff. Like this is pre-smartphone, so like I had like a literal folder, and I was like looking through it and I was like, oh my gosh, like I thought I had left on the fifth. Like my plane ticket says depart on the fourth. So like I make a UE and like drive home, like start packing. So
Yeah.
like him and I end up going to OCS together both summers, and then he ends up through a fluke, right? Like we both end up getting delayed graduation by a semester. So we end up commissioning together in December, and then our paths divert a little bit, but then we both end up in Hawaii. And like I'm on deployment, he's back at home driving my truck, and then like I come back and like am sleeping in his like house while he's packing up to go. And then at one point during one of our deployments, he like knocks on my door like in Okinawa. I open it and I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "This is my room." And it's like, "Oh." So
Oh man.
him and I have just been crossing paths the entire time, and it's been amazing.
That's good. Yeah, that's very blessed because if you both joined and then went opposite sides of the world forever, it would have been like we didn't really think this through, did we? But yeah, I guess Hawaii is that where the surfboards came in?
So I live in Galveston, Texas, and this is actually where I'm from the Houston area, so Galveston is our beach. I learned to surf here. The waves are small, but I'll say that they're probably the easiest waves to learn on because it's all
Yeah.
sand bottom, very forgiving. And like surfing in California or like Hawaii or like even to an extent like Peru and Japan, those are the places that I have surfed. Like they get territorial because like there's a lot of surfers and the waves there are like very precise.
Mm.
Where in Galveston, it's like if you see another surfer, it's like you start waving at each other frantically. Where it's like there's two of us, like this is amazing. So a
Yeah.
little bit
I,
friendlier out here.
I watched a show once where it was actually a surfing competition in Texas, but they were doing it on the waves of the tanker ships. So tanker ships would come through, and then they would catch the waves on their wake. So that was pretty cool. Something
Super mild,
interesting
yeah.
there. But I was gonna say, so let's fast forward. So reconnaissance, you said was kind of like the super grunts. Like, why did you decide to like go so far into the Marines, so to speak, with that kind of work?
No, it's I had a my battalion commander on my second deployment. He was a reconnaissance marine. My executive officer for that battalion, he was a reconnaissance marine. And like I went to the executive officer and was like, "Hey, like I'm thinking about getting out." Like again, like your perspective changes, but like at the time it's like I joined to go to combat and we didn't. So I was like, I'm done. And my executive officer was like, "Hey, like because typically with the Marines, after your first stint, you go to a shore duty or a B billet that's admin focused." He's like, there. My executive officer, my battalion commander was like, if you go recon, you're almost guaranteed another deployment. And at that time, like Iraq was still kind of dicey, Afghan was still going. While I was at the reconnaissance course, like the school that qualifies you, like ISIS popped off.
Mm,
So like it was still a pretty dynamic like landscape when it came to conflict in the Middle East. So like they sold me on this idea where like hey, if you can pass the reconnaissance course, pass dive, go to airborne, all this like you'll get another shot soon. Um, and it just didn't shake out. So like that was the like I could leave the Marines after 4 years. I had honorable. I could have gotten honorable discharge, right? Like done the thing, but they sold me on it. And like is that's kind of a complex emotional question. Like, do I regret never going to combat? Because like there's a part of me that wants to say yes, but there's also the logical side of my head that's like, maybe it's good that people didn't shoot at you. Um,
yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you to begin with. Well, first of all, yeah, I can relate to the hey, if you go recon, you're guaranteed to see action, and then it doesn't happen. There's a lot of mili we call it military guarantees, right? So I don't anything that's military guaranteed, I don't trust at all. For people who have never had that drive or desire to go to combat, like there are plenty of people who would say, "Hey, they'll be the first to raise their hand. Give me the admin job. I'll stay shore tour." What was kind of your drive and motive for like wanting to go to combat? Was it a sense of purpose? Was it hopefully not bloodlust, but hopefully it was like a sense of purpose? Like what was the reason?
You know, there's, and this kind of goes back into the philosophy, right? Like I didn't have a philosophy at this point. So I mean, a part of it probably was bloodlust. I wouldn't have described it like that, but
Yeah.
in lieu of a better answer, but I think at the time, right? Like, hindsight's 2020. At the time, what was driving me was like family history. So neither of my parents are American. So like to dive deeper into that, um, on my mom's side, we'll start with that because it's more immediate. My mom is I don't even know how to, like, the story's kind of weird. So she was born in Hungary at the time of communism.
Mm.
So this goes into the stories of my mother's father. So this guy was an interesting dude, to say the least. So he was a kid during in Budapest, Hungary during World War II. So like he witnessed the firebombing of Budapest by the Allies, right? Like he lived it, and he didn't really talk about it, right? Like, but he told me enough because he knew where I was going in my life trajectory. So he was more open with me than the other grandkids. So
Yeah.
he opened up about like some of the horrible things he saw during that, and like there was a it was a movie, I forget the name, but like the wire runners, like you put the big spool on their backs and like you make them run.
Yeah.
So my grandpa, shockingly, the communists and the Nazis didn't really care for the lives of children. So whoever controlled his block, whether it be the Nazis or the communists, they would round up the kids and put spools on their back to run wire. So like that's my grandpa did some of that. Like I'm not saying it was like epic or like always in danger because some of it might have been benign. But it was enough of a pain where he mentioned it, kind of in a way in which made me feel like he didn't like it. So he did that, and then like after the war, he was let's just say he wasn't always on the right side of the law. The communists robbed Hungary blind after the war, so like he resorted to some nefarious means to like provide food and like money for his family. Um, Mostly stealing and selling on the black market, but particularly like old arms or like old war material. So then that happens. He goes to university in Hungary, and he gets conscripted by the communists to be in the communist military, and he's a tank commander. And he had some on the fun side, right? Like it's not all doom and gloom. On the fun side, he had some hysterical stories of him and his buddies as like in a tank platoon, like T-34 ended up in like the Hungarian countryside, and how they were all just a bunch of like dumb kids that got in trouble constantly.
Yeah.
But I digress. But then Hungary revolts against communist rule. Some say it's because the U.S. said that they would support anybody in their fight against communism. So Hungary heard that and said, like, Roger that, kicked the Russians out. The Russians didn't like it. The Russians came back in and they, flattened Budapest. So my grandpa was involved in that to varying degrees. And, he was persona non grata. Obviously, like, if you take a tank against the communists, they tend to remember that. So his only saving grace was that he was a very brilliant engineer. So he gets married. He has three kids, my mom being one of them. And he's like, I cannot stay here. Like, communism, one, has it out for me. Two, they're not allowing me to explore like the extent of what I want to do, specifically with diesel engines. And he had a buddy that had escaped during the conflict and was living in, of all places, Columbus, Indiana. And he was working for Cummins Diesel. So like to this day, like Cummins Diesel, awesome company. Thank y'all. So uh he gets a phone, like maybe not a phone call. That's probably way too modern. He gets word somehow that like if he can get out of Hungary, Cummins Diesel would sponsor him to come to the United States. So he tries to like get his family and jump the border. They go down to like Yugoslavia to try and swim to Italy. They get caught both times. And, it's like, hey, it's like if we keep doing this, we're going to get burned. So like they hire, I don't know what the term is in at that time period, but I refer to him as a coyote. Right? Like, so he hires a coyote, and he's just some dude in Austria that gets a kick out of smuggling humans. So like they're in the uh, trunk of a car, and they like bribe the right people, and they finally get into Austria, and then from there it's just high speed, like how like the fastest way we can get to the United States and outside of like the reach of the communist authorities or people who try and extradite us back. And then like that's how they got to the United States. And so for me, like that's one half of the family, and it's like, wow, like that's like a hell of an idol to have, and then not try and pursue something similar. And then like even on my dad's side, my great grandfather on the Mexican side is Gustavo Madero, and his whole family were very involved in the 1910 revolution. That the Battle of Casa, I believe it was the Battle of Casa Grandes was the big one. The Division del Norte, they overthrew the. I was not prepared to talk to this. I'm blanking on names. It was the Scientificos, but the name of the dictator escapes me. Porfirio Diaz. There it is. So they overthrew the Scientificos that were in charge of Mexico, and Gustavo Madero, my direct ancestor, his brother Francisco, ended up being president of Mexico. And then unfortunately, they were all murdered. Power politics at its worst. So like you have these two sides of my family and these
Right.
stories. Like it was for me. I'm not saying it was right. I'm absolutely not saying it was right. But for me, it was a very driving thing where it's like I want to touch history in the same way that like my grandpa, my great grandpa did. Like that was a big driving force for me.
For sure, they set the bar of legacy right there for you. And then, so how would you say it? I mean, like the recon school, how did you feel about it? Was it really difficult, going through dive school, going through the aviation stuff? Like, was it really physically demanding for you? Was it the mental aspect that was worse? Like, how was that experience for you personally?
Mentally, the number one thing that breaks people with the reconnaissance community, or at least what I think, I have never been given the numbers. What I think breaks the most people is the water.
Hmm.
People aren't comfortable in the water. And to my parents'
Yeah.
credit, they put us in swim team when we were like 5 years old, and we were in swim team through high school. So like it was very mentally taxing because like anytime you're in a situation where you have a crippling fear of failure, you're right. Like if I fail this school, I get an adverse, fitness report or an evaluation, and like I'm gonna be sent somewhere. Like needs of the, I have zero say in where I get sent if I fail.
Right.
Right, like 100% needs of the Marine Corps. I'll end up in like I don't know Greenland watching a computer screen, like doing PowerPoint. It's like all of my worst fears, like being cold and doing Microsoft Office. So, like there was anytime there's a crippling fear of failure, like it's just mentally taxing. And then from the physical side, like the water I was very comfortable in, so that was great. But oh man, to show you like the level of like intensity of the course at the end of the primer course, they make us run a physical fitness test. And I ran 3 miles in 19 minutes and 6 seconds or something like that. That is like I have not ran that fast since I was 27 when I went through the course. I hadn't ran that fast since I was at least 17. So like best PR in a decade. I come through the finish line. They call out the number. I'm holding my ribs. I'm like panting. I'm getting down on my like holding my knees, like like oh, like checking my pulse. Like oh my gosh, this is like the greatest thing ever. Like I just ran 3 miles in 19 minutes, and then I just hear from like way off in the distance, like someone yelling, Garza, hurry up, we're waiting on you. The entire class had already finished and was done stretching, right? Like the caliber of physicality that community attracts is like phenomenal. I was absolutely the slowest on land, probably one of the weakest people in my class. And I love associating with people better than me because people think I'm that good when I do that. So I'll take it. But like, yeah, like the on land physical fitness part it was horrible. It was a gut punch every day.
Yeah, no, I remember just like mind blowing because I've ran some 5Ks and I remember like I PR'd at like under 18, like, 1756. And it's like, wow, I don't think many people can do better than this. And then you hear some person who's like 15 minutes. It's like, how? Like, I think some people are just built different. So I totally relate to that. And yeah, I get the fear of like re-rating as we call it in the Navy, because there's a lot of people who either they all said they got injured, so I don't know how true this is, but all these people who went through the Navy SEAL program who ended up on my ship who said they got injured or dropped out, all boatswain's mates, basically I don't want to say the lowest of the low in terms of like it sounds degrading, but like the most basic job you can get in the Navy, which is kind of like just doing all the manual labor, kind of just like, all that stuff. Painting, cleaning. Sometimes you can re-rate, but it was like, yeah, it's kind of, not all of them wanted to do that. But basically it was like, hey, you failed, so now we're going to put you where we can put you. And other times I heard stories where, they failed and they said, hey, you're still a really smart person and still really physically fit. So here's your selection of jobs to choose from. It really depends. Same with the nuke school. Some of the people who failed out, they were basically just involuntarily told to go to the worst place with the worst job, and others were given some choice depending on billet availability. So yeah, I totally get that. And you talked about like not being too grounded in philosophy or principles through a lot of your career. What would you say kind of like, did that come down to parenting? Did it come down to just like not having like religion or mentorship? Like what kind of kept you kind of flowing in the wind, so to speak? And like, should parents focus like how should parents focus on distilling principles into their children so that they make informed and purposeful decisions?
That is the $1 million question, man. So like one of the things in like that I've kind of come to the conclusion of is that I'm not an expert. So like when it comes to my philosophy, I want to view it as me walking the path with everyone. Like I have no expertise because I'm in the thick of it right now. Since having my son, I've had a daughter and then twins. So I had 4 kids under 4 or I still have 4 kids 4 and under. So it's instilling. I would love to talk about how I instill principles in my kids, but like I'm really trying to get those twins to eat solids. Like that is, and
Yeah,
but that
step
in
one.
an essence, right? Like that's flying by the seat of my pants. And like I go back to philosophy, I go back to religion, and it's like, all right, like I'm in the thick of it. Like I don't have time to do complex thinking, but I've written down my thoughts, right? Like how do I do this? So full disclosure, it's Stoicism and Catholicism are kind of the 2 pillars of where I've drawn this out. And just, full disclosure, I was raised Catholic. Um, I I met a lot of really bad Christians in my time. So at some point in college, I was like, you know what, this ain't for me. And the thing about my upbringing, though, is that I felt like it was not just a religion; it was also a culture. And I think that was a little bit of the saving grace when it came to meeting my wife. My wife is actually a very like devout Catholic, and talking with her, she, like her and I came to the agreement that like if we get married, like we would raise our kids Catholics, we would be a Catholic family. Which I was already, like I said, I felt culturally Catholic, and I have no qualms going to church because I'm not a faithful no, that's a horrible way to say it. I'm not a spiritual person.
Right.
So like, like if you have a personal relationship with Jesus, like I envy you and congratulations. I really, pursue that. I just don't. It's my struggle. Like I can't bring myself to do it. Um, I'm trying, but what I found, and again, like full disclosure, like I was raised Catholic, and you know, surprise, surprise, I found Catholicism to have some answers that are worthwhile. So the thing that I liked about Catholicism is that it's very articulate in explaining, what do these words mean? Why do we do this way? And I say that not to advocate for people to be Catholic. I say that because, when you look into like, I want to be a fair and, just father that exercises temperance. It's like, okay, that's great. Like, who's defining that? Because like you can open a dictionary and say, all right, this dictionary's definition of it is going to be the end all be all. But then it goes like, how do I execute this? How do I do this in practice, in real life? How do I do this beyond just saying the words? And I found that with Catholicism in particular, and I'm sure that like other denominations have this, and I'm not advocating for a single denomination, but I really enjoyed reading the amount of literature that the Catholic Church had on it, dating back all the way to like the early church fathers, like before like Aquinas, you had like Saint Augustine of Hippo, and like even Polycarp, and like some of those really early ones, which gets really wild when you see these people arguing things that people argue today, in
Yeah.
the year 400, and it's like, well, we still haven't decided on who's right, but what is it now, like over almost 2,000 years, and we'll get there soon. But the history and like the reference documents, reading this, like being able to read those source docs was like, okay, so I use Catholicism as the deep dive, and I use Stoicism as like the practice of the day to day. So like with Stoicism, depending on like who you talk to, like some of the big one is Epictetus, or I feel like the big one is Epictetus. He was a slave in the Roman Empire, and he was his name, I think, literally means the acquired one. And he eventually earned freedom, but he had just written down like all of his thoughts on like, hey, like my life is horrible, but you know what? Like, so what? And he developed this philosophy, or he took like, again, like I don't want to get into the history of Stoicism because it's a little bit more complex than what I'm leading on.
Yeah.
But you have people like Epictetus, who was a slave that ended up being a teacher of emperors. You have an emperor, Marcus Aurelius. You have before that you had Cato, who famously like he was beyond reproach, right? Like, and he was a military commander, he was a politician, and rather than live under Caesar's tyranny, he decided to like fight to the bitter end until his death. Like, and these types of people and the way that they articulate it, the way that they spoke about it was very appealing to me, specifically as a Marine and as a man, right? Like, these were commanders that like didn't sit on the sideline. These were people who didn't talk about it. And like one of my favorite Epictetus quotes is, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. Right? Like, it's not enough to talk about these like high principles. You gotta do it day to day. Like, you gotta live it. And it goes down to like core virtues, like the four cardinal virtues of Stoicism, like align, I think, very nicely with a lot of Christian denominations, like wisdom, temperance, justice, courage, right? And then you have the flip side of that. Like, what are things that really tank you, like as a father, as a service member, as a corporate leader? It's like ignorance, gluttony, wrath, sloth, and like in gluttony though, like I'm not talking specifically food, right? Like if you overindulge in one thing, like you're going to pigeonhole yourself and you're not going to be like valuable. Like, you can't you got to have a little bit of everything. You can't just really hyperindulge in one thing. Like, taking it to like the corporate culture now, like you can't dive 100% into AI, right? Like, because you lose touch with what AI is trying to do, which is help people in their day to day. Like, it requires temperance. Like, you can't just say like we're going to replace X amount of functions with artificial intelligence. Like 90% of, I should avoid numbers. A large percentage of AI pilots fail. Like a shockingly high number of AI pilots
Yeah.
fail. And you can't just like go all in without understanding that like this is a system. Um, but so like when it comes to parenting, and like when it's all said and done, I view parenting as my number one responsibility. And I mean that in a very particular hierarchy. Number one is my wife. I love my wife more than I love my kids. Again, I'm not saying that's for everybody, right? Like, I'm not an expert. We're all on this journey together, but that's how I view it, because how I love my wife is going to be how my kids view relationships.
Yeah,
So I want to love my
100%.
wife more than anyone else. And like, am I good at that? No, like, but I'm trying. So then I love my kids. I try and love them all equally. And then when it comes to the principles, I think the number one thing when it comes to kids is temperance, right? Like, I'm not going to be good 100% of the time, but if I can try and be consistent, if I can try and like approach situations in the same way, and my kids know what to expect, um, whether I'm angry or happy, like try and introduce temperance into my approach. I would say that that's like the number one thing that I try and do, and that that comes from a combination of Stoicism and like Christianity, um, and that also came from like that time period we talked about at the very beginning, where it's like I'm going to be a company commander, I'm going to be a dad, I'm going to be a corporate like corporate manager. Like, what does this mean for me? Like, because the one thing that clients love, the one thing that kids love, the one things that the Marines love is consistency. Like that's really what it comes down to. Like, if they know how you're going to react. So like, let's break this down for the military side. If your subordinates know how you're going to react, if they understand your reaction, that increases their reaction time. And like in the US military, we operate off of the maneuver mindset, the disaggregated command, like empowering your subordinate leaders to act with intent. The key to being able to increase the decision matrix, like the decision chain, is to give people confidence in what your reaction is going to be to their decisions. Because it's like, hey, if I make this decision and I don't know how this dude's going to act, is he going to be upset? Is he going to be happy? Is it going to be like, if I make this decision and it ends up failing, but I made it for the right reasons, am I more concerned about the outcome than I am with the reason for the decision? So like, especially with recon, like the company commander's not making a lot of tactical decisions. Those are like down at the team leader level, like platoon level. Company makes very few tactical decisions. So it's like I really wanted to, like, that's another driving force behind like this philosophy was, how do I explain to people how I'm going to think and react? Like, because y'all need to know what I'm thinking so that you can make decisions faster. And then like, again, go to the corporate side. Like, what clients love consistency. Like, it doesn't matter if like you can deliver an excellent product this week and then next week it's like subpar, even if it's just a little subpar. And then the next week you're back on top. Like, that inconsistency can be troubling, because it's like, I'm paying something for a product. And now, like, I don't want to presume intention of all clients, but it's like, I would rather pay for something that I have a guaranteed return on than I do where it's like I'm paying this entity and hoping that, like I get a good week. Like that consistency breeds confidence in buyers. And then again, like we already talked about parenting, right? Like, kids love consistency and like being temperate in like that approach.
Yeah, for sure. And then would you say, are there any other principles or practices that either the Marines or Recon or both kind of instilled in you or that you learned through your leadership there that you still kind of embody today as a father and just as a man in general?
The the big one I've learned the hard way is, like, and I alluded to it earlier, if somebody made the right decision and if somebody had the right reasons and the right choice and it just ended in failure, do not, for me, right? Like, again, inward focused. It doesn't matter what the outcome. Well, that's probably an overstatement. Outcomes matter, but your reasoning behind the outcome is just as important for the outcome. We cannot control everything. We can only control what we control. And if we have put in the correct mitigation factors for what we can control and the outcome is not what we wanted, I am not going to lose it. I'm not going to lose sleep over that. Right? Like, I can't control outside factors. Like, the clients introduced a new stakeholder last minute that hates, you know, that hates Ariel and wants Times New Roman, right? Like, hey, I have no control over that. right? Like, am I going to be upset over something I have no control over? No. Or it's, hey, this, like this young Marine made a decision and that led to another a training failure, right? Like training failure. It's like, hey, what was his decision process? And it's like, if his decision process was solid and it's just like, hey, like his team, his squad failed to like just down the targets. It's like, all right, that's an accuracy issue, right? Like we can correct that. Like the decision was fine. So like don't be strictly outcomes dependent for your reaction. Like that to me was the biggest takeaway from my military service. Like if you're only judging people off outcomes, people can make horrible decisions and it could work, right? And if you reward that, then you're incentivizing a culture that is
Yeah.
like does not care about process and only cares about outcome, and that is a dangerous culture to have.
Yeah, they call that the ends justify the means kind of, philosophy. And I'll say too, with what you said, that I wish more military leaders embodied. And I got to overhear my captain on my ship. I was sitting in the mess hall for the Chiefs, and they were doing the captain's mass next door, and the captain stepped out to do the debrief with the higher ups in the Chiefs galley. So I got to overhear some of that, and I really like the way he looked at it, which is the way we've talked about ideal parenting on the show, which is not blaming the individual first, right? But looking at all the environmental factors. So a lot of times in homes, when let's say a child acts up in school and then the parents get a phone call, they come home and a lot of parents would be like, "What's wrong with you? Why did you do that?" Well, you, instead of, asking and looking at environmental factors. Like, for example, one of the number one things is like if a child has always had, good grades and then suddenly they start failing a class. Well, people will say, "Why didn't you study more? Why aren't you trying hard?" Instead of being like, is there family drama at home? Is there some kind of hardship? Is there some hardship at school that's affecting the child's ability to study or their grades? But so many people are quick to blame. Same with military. People say like, "Hey, this member did X, Y, Z because they're not trying hard enough." Like for you said, if it's if it's especially if it's a team thing, it's like, no, actually it was because of all these other moving parts. So I think it's so important. Again, you kind of like hinted at, not just jumping to the blame of the person because of the outcome, but looking at like everything that affected the outcome rather than placing the sole responsibility on the person. Like still hold them accountable and but you should definitely do a full investigation into it. And then, I want to get into as well, we talked about your time in the reconnaissance, and a lot of people say like once a Marine, always a Marine. And so I know that you still kind of keep up with all that stuff. And you and I were talking beforehand about the Reconnaissance Foundation. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and how you're staying connected with the community.
Thank you for that, man. No, so the Reconnaissance Foundation, it's the foundation for the reconnaissance community. And what I mean by that is any recon Marine or anybody who served in a recon battalion, the Reconnaissance Foundation is their foundation, or at least that's how they market it. And they do phenomenal work, particularly with Gold Star families. And there's a special place. I'm sure every service member can relate. Like we all know somebody. Unfortunately, it's just a high risk job. Like we all know people who have died. And there's one thing like we all would like to be the people that like reach out to the family, offer help. Um, and it's hard, especially like people in my stage of life. It's like I have four small kids of my own. Like it's really hard for me to like take on more. And what the Reconnaissance Foundation does is it hosts an annual Gold Star Family Retreat, among other things. They do a lot of work for the community as a whole. But for me personally, like what pulls up my heartstrings is that Gold Star Family Retreat, and it's a small thing that we can or that I can do to give back to the community that has given me so much love. Well, tongue in cheek love. Like it's a pretty cutthroat community, but
Yeah.
we love it. So yeah, like it is. It's the only thing that I would probably advocate for is take if somebody wants to give, not asking you to, but if you feel inclined, uh, the Reconnaissance Foundation is a good foundation that really supports families of the fallen.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you to explain is because like I know what Gold Star family is because of my service, but for all those listening, especially civilian side, what does that mean?
So a Gold Star family is a family that has a service member that has died. So you'll see flags sometimes outside of houses. So blue star with a white background with a red outline. That typically means that somebody's deployed. And then if it's a gold star, that means that somebody's died. So when we say Gold Star families, it's for any family member of a service member who has died in the line of duty that, then that family's in loss. And it's
Yeah.
really, um, the hardest. I only have one. I only have one Marine that I keep in contact with his family that has that has died, and like when it comes to those families, like there's a hole in that family that just can't be filled.
Yeah.
I absolutely don't want to perpetuate like a some sort of like perpetual victim narrative because that is not the case. But I think that it is very in the same way that like whenever I'm around other veterans, like I feel like I can go back to a part in my life where, like I could speak a certain way or like say certain jokes that like no one knows what a DD-214 is outside of the military. And that's like a great punchline, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so like that's a part of my life and like there's no way to get around it. For those Gold Star families to be around other Gold Star families, to be amongst members of a community that can relate to what their service member did. I feel like that maybe not healing's probably not the right word, but cathartic. And I think that that's a lot of good.
Yeah, for sure. And we're gonna have the link in the description below for anyone who wants to check out the Reconnaissance Foundation further. And funny you mentioned that. I wanted to buy the other day. This guy had outside his business mannequin wearing a shirt that said DD-214 alumni or like graduate. And I wanted it, but it was just for display only. I was like, I gotta find me one of those because I think that was funny. It was like set up to look like a college shirt and everything with like the same font style and stuff. So I was like, that's pretty funny. I'll take that. But yeah, so I mean, we kind of talked about a lot here. If you could kind of, sum it all up into one final message as we wrap up here, what would you want everyone to take away from our conversation?
So one, if you haven't try and write down your philosophy. Like go through like what are some virtues and some vices that like you find important or that you want to avoid. Write down, high level stuff like what is the most important thing for me? Like what is it that I want to like pass on? How do I approach adversity when I experience hardship? Like how do I personally stay resilient and how like what can I come back to make sure that I'm making consistent decisions over time? Now those decisions may change based off information, but I want to be consistent in my approach. And then last thing, like you can only control what you can control. So focus on that. And if you can focus on what you can control, everything else tends to fall by the wayside.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mr. Garza, first of all, thank you for your service to this country. And then thank you for, I think, like you said, podcast guesting, going out there and sending a message when, entirely voluntarily, you're just doing it because you want to see people thrive. So I appreciate that. You're still serving the community beyond your recon days. So I appreciate that. And I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors, my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of a ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.